Welcome to Hope Rescue Podcast. We're glad that you're with us. I'm Tim, and this is
Kimberly.
We sometimes are confused with Tim and Kim. Don't call her Kim. She gets a little upset about it.
No, I don't get upset.
No,
I
you
just
don't.
feel like it's not the name my mom and dad gave me. But
Well, hey, maybe they noticed that we're on separate sides.
I know.
This
Look
time.
at us. I
So
know.
here's something I learned. And those of you who are not married, those of you who are already married know this thing. But those of you who are not married, there is a very big decision that you make when you first get married. It's like even on your honeymoon, it's your first night together.
important.
It's very important. I didn't know this.
Life-changing.
But when you choose a side of the bed, that's for life.
Forever.
Like you can't change it. You go to I thought I was like being the protectors because I'm on the outside, but no, it was she wants on that side. So no matter where we are, we just
choose that
sold
side.
our house that we lived in the first part of our
17
marriage.
years, yeah.
And we just sold that and moved to a new house. And I have to be on the same side.
You say you have to be? You wanted the side
Like, what
closest
if
to the bathroom.
If I wanted to switch it, would you let me? When we're in a hotel room, do you let me switch sides?
Well, after 13 years of marriage, I feel like it would be inappropriate.
Wow.
But we
That is
switched it
weird.
up here today, so we're keeping it fresh.
So anyway, we're talking about blended families, not about marriage. If we were talking about marriage, we're not ready for that. So anyway, we're going to talk about blended families, and we have this anchor passage. Kimberly, would you read that for us?
Sure. It's out of Ephesians 4:1, and it's Paul, and he's saying, I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called, with all humility and gentleness, which we talked about last week, patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And so, again, we covered in the last few weeks being humble and what that means, which means to not have an agenda, to defer to others, to lower your opinion of yourself, listen to others, to be gentle, which means to be unaffected, to have meekness, which is strength under control, and be even-tempered.
Yeah, and so patience is the one we're going to deal with today, which, like this kind of a slow reaction to things. Like some people are quick to react.
Some people, Tim?
Some people at this table might be quick to react. I'm a little bit reactionary, not about big things, but about little things. Like on little things,
Yeah.
I kind of come unglued
It's true
real
in a
quickly.
crisis, you're like solid as a rock. But let's just say perhaps someone changes lanes in front of you and they don't use their turn signal. It could be a thing.
Well, Dr. Kimberly, I think that the problem is that I have a little residual anger about having to sleep on that same side of the bed, and I'm taking it out on the people on the traffic.
Right.
Well, I
Yeah,
don't know.
that could be.
Anyway, patience is this ability to just kind of, relax with things and flow with things. I think that's probably one of the primary drivers of humility and gentleness. But this ability is kind of hang in there. A couple of weeks ago, we had Shara on, our daughter
That was
Shara.
so much fun.
Yeah, it was fun. And right at the end of the show, or maybe it was the week before, I don't remember. But I kind of mentioned some things about traditions, and I felt like I kind of shortchanged that and how important they are. So I'm just going to mention a couple of things about that. Traditions like eating meals together, traditions like sharing special moments. Recently, our daughter graduated from high school.
Our last kid out.
Yeah, last kid out.
Whew.
And so we had a
Jesus.
sibling celebration, and it was a great time the other day, and it was awesome because it was an opportunity to say what we are. What did you have? Everybody, your favorite memory of
so
Gracie.
we had like a big, like a typical party where everybody's just hanging out and having fun and playing music, dancing, all the business. But then having simple traditions like you're talking about play out in our family, where at some point in the evening we gather around in all of our couches, and we decided to everybody go around and say their best or favorite memory of Gracie through her childhood years and through school. And then we turned it around and said, now each one of you take a second and recall to let's see, what was it? It was,
What was your
what
favorite
was
memory
your
growing
favorite
up?
teacher
Favorite
and
teacher, yeah.
subject and why?
Which I didn't
And
have
so
one.
what that does is, because in our family, we have sibling parties because literally we can't fit anybody else in our house. It gets so big. So what it does though is it gives pause in all of that to have meaningful connection, to actually be quiet and listen, because we have so many voices and strong personalities in our house. So it gives the opportunity for each person to be heard and to share their thoughts, and it's actually so cool.
Yeah, one of the things that we have to do, like anytime you get your kids together, even though they're adults, all of them except Gracie. Gracie is, adulthood now, but lives at our home. She lives at
She's
the
in
home.
the home.
Anyway, it's hard because they revert back to childhood and they take these roles as oldest, youngest, middle child, that kind of thing. And what happens is they start acting out like children. And so I have to correct them, go, hey guys, so-and-so's speaking. And I feel like the ogre, but nobody's listening if we don't
And
do
they're
it.
all
So anyway,
adults now,
yeah, they're
so.
adults and they obey like children. So, which is not very much. But anyway, what I was thinking about that we kind of touched on, but I wanted to hit on about blending a family. And because there's chaos in a blended family and pain, stability comes through these traditions. Think about the reliability of that moment you are anticipating. So here we have this celebration. We have, the kid's biological father was over for this celebration, and we're all laughing, having a great time. But they're anticipating so much so that when we were doing this, they're anticipating Gracie's birthday coming up. And Malachi goes, you know what? I'm saving it for her birthday. I got nothing good to say about her. So it's just like, but it's that anticipation.
Yeah, the certain things we do for each holiday.
It brings certainty. And I think that's the key. We really recommend, without going into too much depth, because we really want to talk about this whole matter of what it means to be patient in blending a family. I just think it's important for you to understand that traditions at first will be difficult, but you have to be patient. And eventually they're going to fall in where people are going to want to really spend that time.
Yeah.
Like one of the things, when you share with them what you did on the way to school.
We get overwhelmed sometimes with the idea of traditions, like it's another thing to have to do, when really it just can mean the simple rhythms of our life and the choices you make in the little things you do every day. And we were talking about this before this podcast, but something I've done with the kids since they were little. It's not a lot, but hustling kids to school, and then me getting to work, especially as a single mom, in the car was a meaningful time. So we'd start out with prayer in the morning, and it wouldn't be anything fancy. I would ask if anybody had anything to pray for specifically, and sometimes we'd take turns praying, but it would be a simple basics covered, like, Lord, thank you for this, always starting with a grateful heart, listing a couple of our needs and praying for protection over them over the day. And what it does is it's another anchor in their life that grounds them in their daily routines, something to look forward to. It's a connection with all of us, and obviously leading them in their faith.
Yeah.
And this is going to sound silly, but just off on the same topic, one of the things I did starting as a single mom is I used to, on Sunday mornings, it was rough, and Saturday nights I was serving at a church where we had 7 services. So the kids were at a lot of church through the weekend. But one of my ways to get them up early in the morning is I'd say we'd drive through Starbucks. Now that tradition, in the early days, I used to split small chocolate milks between them because I had 5 kids and it's expensive, but they were so excited to get ready on Sunday mornings because that was part of their tradition in going to church. And that carried through the years till the point they started buying my Starbucks. So.
Well, yeah, when you have that many kids, you have to be really careful. So, for example, like those of you who want some budgeting tips, if you have 5 kids like we had at home at one time, go to Costco, and you know how they have the little snacks, and go take them to all the different snack places, and that's their lunch.
free, yeah.
You know,
gotta time it just
It's a
right.
real giveaway when you hold hands and thank the Lord for the food before you eat a snack. Yeah, can I have 4 of those? No, sir. You can only have 1 per.
And then you tell them to take the hats out of their backpacks so they don't get recognized the second time they go through.
Yeah. So anyway, a little tip from Uncle Tim and Kimberly,
Yes,
Aunt Kimberly.
yes.
So I kind of want to drop down and talk about this issue of patience and kind of what the studies have shown about what happens with blended families.
Right. Well, so in regards to, you're speaking about discipline, right, in families?
Well,
or
yeah, just
having patience.
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
the patience that it takes for a family, and then what studies show
Yeah.
about a blended family
Well,
and relationship.
I think the first thing we need to do is recognize you got to pump your brakes with any real solid plans on what that's going to look like. And especially when it regards to discipline, pump your brakes on that for a while and get some good equipment and tools to navigate your way through that. But studies show it takes 2 to 5 years to blend a family.
Yeah.
So, you can have high expectations, but it just takes 2 to 5 years just to start to feel like you are a cohesive unit.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. And in regards to discipline, we've found that that's important, that time frame, to actually earn the right to discipline.
Yeah. So when we spoke on this at Eastlake is a large church. There are thousands of people that attend every week. I think the reach of that church is well over 10,000. But anyway, so we had a lot of questions about people that are thinking about marrying. So the couple have fallen in love and they've got children and they're going to blend that family. And one of the questions has been, how do we know to discipline? How to discipline them? And I said, you've got to sit down. You've got to strategize this before you get married.
Right.
Don't get in there and think, you guys love each other, so the kids will love each other.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It may happen. That'd be a beautiful thing. But really strategize that 2 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And in most cases, 2 to 5 years, some of the kids are already out of the home. So, take your time. It just really love well. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and remember the fact that these kids are navigating potentially 4 parents with 4 different parenting styles, if you think about it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of confusion and conflict in that. And disciplining children for your own personalized offenses is a mistake. We've learned that. Like, you can't discipline your kids out of...
I'd never do that.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. But it's a major reason for some of the failure that happens in blended families. We have to earn the right to speak to and into the children in this blend.
How do you think people personalize behavior? So you talk to that, but let me share a story. When I was a kid, my dad was the pastor of our church, and we had what he called the sanctuary. Now, I preach very often in Torrey Pines at Torrey Pines Church, and we have a sanctuary, and it's got stained glass window.
It
and
looks
stuff.
like one too.
Yeah,
It's so grand.
It's very
Yeah.
sanctuary, and the kids, when I was a child, my dad would not allow us to run in there because he said it was the sanctuary. Well, when I got older, of course, I looked at scripture and I didn't see that as a sanctuary. We're the sanctuary. Together, we're the house of God, all that doctrinal stuff. But I know my dad was concerned, not to judge my father, because I understand that, especially in those days. My dad was concerned that people were going to be upset at him as a pastor
Right.
because his kids are running in the sanctuary. So he would be overly harsh on us
Sure.
instead of being patient with us and so forth. Kids going to act like kids.
Right.
And I tell people all the time, we have some people that lead worship, and they run the worship, and they bring their kids to that because the kids program isn't open yet and so forth when they're practicing, and the kids are running around. Should we stop these kids? I go, hey, look, they're not harming anything. They're not breaking anything. They're not creating a mess. I'd say let the kids be kids. Let them be children.
Right.
Don't try to turn them into adults.
Right. Yeah.
That kind of, you need to be patient with children to allow them to grow.
Right. And personalizing usually comes down to our own pride and ego in regard to how we believe other people will perceive us as parents. So when kids are just acting like kids and being dumb sometimes and making mistakes or just being silly, childish, right? And we think somehow that reflects bad on us. That's personalizing.
Yeah.
And when we need to step back and certainly not discipline out of that, you need to discipline yourself
Yeah.
to not react in those moments, not the child, and take your time with that. But, our goal is to seek and heal the hurt and stop the cycle of pain in blended families. And so you're throwing gasoline on the fire if you are going to discipline in moments of anger or moments that make you feel like you've been made to look bad by your child's behavior. And I think something that's really important that we learned through this was in getting off on the right foot in blending is speaking words of edification to your kids and the blended children, like the additional kids, the bonus kids, your bonus kids. That helps kind of remove the barrier and open their heart to you. Speaking words of life and letting go of the thoughts of the failure that you may feel that they're reflecting upon you.
Yeah. So I was thinking, I have taught this for years for married couples, and it works for blended family. It works if you just nuclear family or you're just married with no children. Here's something to keep in mind. Edification is a powerful way to reach the heart of the person you love. But it's not just edifying them to themselves. So not saying, hey, Kimberly, you look nice today, or I appreciate what you said or what you did. That's edification. It's important to do that. But then there's another way to edify, and that's what I call third person edification. So if I'm speaking to someone else and I'm saying, this is what my wife is like, not tearing her down, but building her up. So that creates power. So she knows she feels safe when I'm talking to other people, and she feels safe when I'm talking to her. So that second and third person edification, let's be honest, a lot of us spend a lot of time in first person edification. I'm so good. I'm so great. Look at me.
Yeah.
But that edification is really powerful in that giving those words of life. Patience is really important. So one of the things is that you may have a child that is kind of holding out, and oftentimes it's adult children. So in our situation, we had 5 young kids, one that was just barely a teenager, and the youngest who can't even remember us not being married because she was 4. So, and 5 of those. But then we had 2 adult children from my previous marriage. And so when you blend that in, how's that going to work out? They're not living together with us. They're living on their own, and they have families of their own. They have children of their own. And so how does that work out? And think about what's happening in the dynamic. And for my girls, the dynamic was because their mother had committed suicide. My first wife she committed suicide. So they're just kind of reeling from that, and still to this day are, struggling with that.
Yeah.
And it's been years, but when that happened, now I'm married to another woman who feels like a replacement to their mother. Secondly, there's 5 children that I'm living with, and they're hurting, and they're watching the blending of your children, Kimberly, with my heart and my heart to them. And that was a really special challenge with our girls, and especially our oldest daughter, Carrie, who was very, very close to me. We've been close since she was a little girl. And between the girls, I'd consider both of them daddy girls, daddy's girls. But I watched their hearts and Carrie's heart feel like they're losing that connection. And we talked about that in our message. But one of the things that I think that I saw that was powerful is this kind of patience in not personalizing their concern about you. You were very patient. There were some unkind things that were said,
Yeah.
and some things that were, not horrible, but they certainly weren't great. And that was challenging. What was that like for you, and how did you deal with that?
I feel like I understood how difficult it would be because I watched my own children go through the process with their bio dad and hit the relationships he was in and out of, and how that impacted them. So there's a mistrust there of someone new. And in your case with the girls, they had a massive size gap in their hearts from the painful exit of their mom out of their lives. So there was obviously this huge threat that they were going to lose you too.
Yeah.
And understandably. So that helped me just by trying to step into their shoes and understand a little bit. And I think I just knew early on that since they didn't really know me, it couldn't be personal. They didn't know me.
Well, that's a good point.
Not to hate
That's
me.
never stopped me from personalizing people's behavior.
So yeah, but I tend to be an empath anyway, so I think it was easy for me to understand. Now that doesn't mean it didn't hurt.
Yeah,
it did, and but I also knew that if I was to be a reactor to that, it would only build that wall between us instead of break it down.
Yeah.
So that was fortunately over time resolved, and I have such a sweet relationship with the girls now. I'm very grateful for that. But you also have to have patience in working with the other parents, and that's one of the things we've discovered too. When you remarry, you have a new team, and you have that team, ideally should be protecting against the pains of the past marriage and working together ideally with similar rules and sort of a groundwork, and looking out for each other. And that is ideal. That's not always the case.
Yeah.
And I think we've shared before, we've misstepped through that process, as I think most people can relate to. But you really want to try to establish, if possible, early on, that you are a team, so that you can help disseminate with your children that transition back and forth, in that there is so much contrast between the two, so if there's some anchors that remain the same in parenting, if you can come around a table like we're sitting now, ideally, and be able to negotiate that as couples, like what are some of the things we can do to support each other, my gosh, that would be amazing. It's rare.
Yeah, I think that one of the things we talk about patience as it relates to discipline, working with the four sets of parents. Mm-hmm. I think you first have to look, and we've talked about this too, you have to look into the hearts of the kids and go, what is it that they are going through?
Right.
So in our situation, they didn't have, stable home on one side and stable home in our home. Mm-hmm. In fact, much the opposite of that. But in a lot of your relationships that you have in your blended families, there may be two stable homes, and you got a husband and a wife that are doing their best on one side, and then they've got their own blend, and then on your side you've got your own blend. So these kids are going back and forth. Maybe they have siblings from their step parent on one side, and then they go to the other house, they have siblings from another, so they got a whole other set of siblings. It's a very, very complex situation. So one of the things I think that all mature adults, and not everybody's mature in these situations, but they're adults, is to get together, sit down, strategize that, because it's very difficult when your kids come back from the chaos and they're kind of acting out a little bit, which we had. They would come back and they're acting out a little bit.
We talked about that last week with Sean.
Yeah, we did. And it's hard to just be patient through that process, and kind of running that through that grid of that call in Ephesians 4, our anchor passage, to really be patient, not just humble, but
Right.
patient,
Right.
and just give them enough space to grow.
Right.
And I think we did that. And sometimes there was more leniency, and sometimes there was more restrictiveness.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think there was patience, because the kids will then begin to manipulate the
Sure.
parents against
Take
each other.
advantage.
So really keep that in mind.
Yeah, and we experienced that as well. I think one of the things, if I could just throw this out there on a practical note, for those of you who can't come together around a table and there's a lot of, you're still getting in the weeds of the painful, upset of divorce. Early on, we were there, and I was obviously a single mom at the time. And I really feel like God kind of helped me to realize very quickly that whoever my ex-husband was in a relationship with, to not make them the enemy and see them as a target, but to recognize an opportunity to, regardless whatever was being said about me, that I had the ability to be an influence. And so one of the things I did early on was start to write thank you cards for when the kids would come back with a story of, well, so-and-so took me here and so-and-so did this with me, and intentionally recognize and be grateful to them for their kindness and care of the children. Didn't matter if I loved them or not, but just appreciating on a humanity level. And I'm telling you, that actually broke down the walls.
Yeah, I think too, and that was a powerful thing. But I think too that there are a lot of you that your ex is dating someone else. And maybe in a live-in relationship, and then that one falls apart, and then there's a new
Right.
relationship. And so there's this kind of chaotic environment over there. And so your kids have, you really have to be careful not to overreact to those situations. One of the things, and I kind of want to conclude with this, is talking about patience as it relates to affection.
Right.
Because we're both affectionate
Affectionate,
people.
right, yeah.
And fortunately, most of our kids are affectionate.
Yeah.
Not all of them.
Well,
but
they grew up in it, so
Yeah.
that's something
They
you
kind of
catch.
tolerate it.
It's
Yeah.
been caught.
Yeah.
If it doesn't come natural. But yeah, it's important. We've learned with affection to lead with words of affirmation first, if you're
Yeah.
trying to garner that love and affection from your kids, because everybody feels some kind of way having come out of like the tornado of divorce. And so you don't just come in like a wrecking ball, all arms. We're very affectionate people, so that tends to be our MO. But I think earning their love quietly by using words of affirmation is a great way to start. And then start small with the affection, like patting on the back, or
Well, here's an interesting thing. As our children have become adults, every time they come to the house and every time they leave,
Yeah.
hug and
kiss,
I
yeah.
love you.
Yeah.
And every time,
Yeah.
because it's been shaped in them. One of the things I would say, because some of you are cross-sexual with stepchildren, so like especially you stepfathers, I'm speaking to you stepfathers, if you have a teenage stepdaughter and you came into their life, I came into Char's life when she was in middle school. She was already kind of developed beyond her years. I'm just speaking frankly, physically,
Yeah.
and in many ways she was pretty
Emotionally older.
emotionally older. And she's a very affectionate person, but at first there was not that
was shut
affection.
down, yeah.
Because that's weird. I mean, I've raised now 4 girls, 4 teenage girls and 3 teenage boys. One thing I know, that the girls hit a certain stage and it's kind of weird to hug daddy.
Yeah.
And they tolerate it because
Follow their lead.
Yeah. But especially with a stepchild, be very
Yeah.
careful and be very slow to all of the girls will sit on my lap, and they're
Yeah.
very loving, and so that works out.
So the
Just
safety settles
patience
in
is the
and
key.
the trust.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then the safety is there. Look, we're running out of time, so we need to close out.
Yeah, you guys,
let them know
thanks
what's
for
going on
joining
next
us.
week.
Next week, we're going to be talking about tolerance, which is going to be really awesome.
It's a really hard one for me, so tolerance.
And we look forward to seeing you. Join us on YouTube and invite your friends. This is obviously a niche kind of conversation we're having about blended families, but I'm telling you, according to statistics, there's about 64% of us that can relate. So tag a friend, let them know, invite them to join us next week, and we'll see you then. Thanks.
Thanks.